I found him practicing how to shatter my world, while his mistress and my best friend recorded it all. He sneered, predicting, "She'll break down, plead with me. She'll insist she can't function without me. Offer to change, to do absolutely anything, as long as I don't go." He spoke. I stood there and absorbed every word, and then I let a single envelope glide across the polished table, signed, sealed, and legally witnessed. His confident smirk dissolved in an instant. The camera captured every flicker of his expression as he tore it open and began to understand the monumental scale of his miscalculation. I had never intended to be back at the office so early. For once, the freeway had been a sea of green lights, and my lunch meeting with the Vanguard Investment Group had concluded a full 40 minutes ahead of schedule. As I walked through the quiet, employee-only rear entrance of our modern glass and steel building, I was mentally composing the triumphant speech I'd give to Ethan. The Vanguard contract was all but a done deal. One final signature was all that stood between us and the stratosphere. After 4 brutal years of 60-hour work weeks, sleepless nights, and taking colossal financial risks, our little startup was about to become a major player. Before we delve deeper into the story, I want to take a moment and thank you for being here, for joining me on this path from betrayal to vindication. If you have ever been underestimated, taken for granted, or had your contributions overlooked, then this story is for you. I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to the channel. It costs nothing, and it brings you into a community of people who understand and appreciate these narratives of quiet resilience and meticulously planned justice. Now let's get back to the exact second my life split in two. It was then that I heard my husband's voice, seeping out from the main conference room. The heavy glass door left carelessly ajar. There was a quality in his tone that made me freeze in the hallway, an unfamiliar and chilling arrogance I had never heard him use, especially not at work. "She'll break down, plead with me," Ethan was saying, his voice laced with a derisive amusement I could picture on his face as clearly as if I were in the room. "She'll insist she can't function without me. Offer to change." I froze completely, my fingers clenching the strap of my laptop bag so hard my knuckles blanched. A knot of pure dread tightened in my gut, a nauseating sensation I couldn't immediately place. Who could he possibly be talking about with such contempt? "She'll say she'll do absolutely anything, as long as I don't go," he went on, adopting a high-pitched, mocking imitation of a pleading voice that sent a shard of ice through my veins. Every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet, to remain unseen. I pressed myself flat against the cool drywall next to the doorframe, my breathing shallow as my husband's voice continued its dreadful performance. "Amelia has always been so predictable. Remember when I got accepted to that MBA program on the other side of the country? The floodgates opened instantly. Same reaction when I brought up selling her father's cabin to get the first round of funding for the company. My name, Amelia. He was talking about me. The polished concrete floor seemed to pitch and sway under my feet, but some newfound rigid strength held me in place. The timing is critical," Ethan continued, his voice dropping back to a conspiratorial, business-like tone. "It has to be right after we get the signature from Vanguard, but before their capital actually lands in our corporate accounts. She'll be too much of a wreck to think rationally about her shares or her stake in Apex." A woman's voice answered, and its familiarity made my skin crawl. "And you're positive the prenup is ironclad for this?" Chloe, our director of marketing. The woman Ethan had championed hiring, despite her glaring lack of qualifications. The woman who had been pulling suspiciously late nights at the office with my husband while I was flying across the country to court the Vanguard team. "Completely," Ethan replied, his confidence absolute and casual. "When we signed that, Amelia was just the heartbroken daughter holding a massive inheritance check. She had no concept of what we were creating. The language in the prenup explicitly shields my business ventures." Those are the exact words. Her father's money. He'd just called it her father's money, a seed fund. My father had passed away only 6 months before Ethan and I met. The grief was still a raw, open wound when he proposed a year later. My dad's life insurance, combined with the sale of his successful construction company, had left me with almost $1.5 million. It was money I had intended to invest slowly, thoughtfully, over a lifetime. Instead, I poured every last cent into Ethan's dream, into our dream, or so I had foolishly believed. Honestly, another female voice piped up, I'm genuinely impressed. You've thought of every single angle. Ethan sounded almost dismissive now, bored. She's not a very complex person. A soft, cruel laugh from Chloe. And you're really sure you want me filming this whole thing? For prosperity's sake. Posterity, the other woman corrected. It was Jessica, my best friend since college. And yes, we absolutely need to document her reaction when you drop the bomb, just in case she tries to pull something funny with the company later. She won't, Ethan cut in, his tone final. Amelia despises confrontation. She always has. She'll be far too devastated to even consider fighting back. In that moment, something inside me fractured and then reset, like a bone healing incorrectly for years, suddenly being broken and set properly. The woman they were so callously dissecting, the woman my own husband believed he knew inside and out, simply evaporated. In her place stood someone entirely new, someone their cynical calculus had failed to account for. The old me would have burst into the room, screaming, crying, demanding to know why. But I didn't. Instead, I took 3 silent, deliberate steps backward, turned on my heel, and walked with legs that felt both numb and electrified toward the emergency stairwell. Only inside that cold, echoing concrete enclosure did I finally let out one long, shuddering breath. My father had built his construction empire from the ground up, fueled by 60-hour weeks and an unwavering code of honor. Always understand the full blueprint before you even think about breaking ground. He'd told me more times than I could count. Right now, I needed the complete blueprint of the war that had just been declared on my life. Back in my office, I locked the door and sank into my chair, my mind already a whirlwind, churning through every legal document Ethan and I had ever signed. The prenuptial agreement I'd naively considered a mere formality, the operating agreement for Apex Innovations that defined our ownership stakes, the nearly signed Vanguard contract that was poised to quadruple our company's valuation overnight. While my computer whirred to life, I slipped off my wedding ring. The 3-carat diamond that had once been a symbol of our future now looked obscene, like nothing more than a gaudy transaction fee. It was the down payment Ethan had made to gain access to my inheritance. I logged into our company's secure cloud server and began to methodically, emotionlessly download everything. Years of financial records, every signed contract, all internal and external email correspondence, detailed minutes from every board meeting. My hands moved with a strange, detached efficiency, even as my mind reeled from the sheer scale of the betrayal. 4 years of marriage. 6 years of a partnership I thought was built on mutual respect. It was all a long con, a series of calculated moves in a game where I never even knew I was a player. My phone vibrated on the desk, a text from Ethan. How'd the Vanguard meeting go? Late one for me tonight. Big project with the marketing team. With the marketing team. With Chloe. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady as I typed my reply. Meeting was incredible. The deal is basically done. Don't worry about tonight. Take your time. A chilling sense of calm washed over me as I hit send. Ethan was convinced he had me perfectly mapped out. He had a flowchart for my tears, a projection for my pleading. He thought he knew exactly who Amelia Thorne was and precisely what she would do. But he had made one fatal error in his calculations. He had never actually seen me fight for anything because up until this moment, I had always believed we were fighting on the same side. He had never witnessed what I was capable of when I was backed into a corner, because he had always been the one standing beside me, pretending to be my staunchest ally, never my adversary. I opened my phone's contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't needed to call in years. Samuel Vance, my father's fiercely loyal attorney, the man who had managed his estate and had given me advice on my inheritance, the man who had gently, respectfully suggested a more robust prenuptial agreement, an offer I had politely, foolishly waved away. Samuel? It's Amelia Thorne. I need your assistance with a matter that is both urgent and requires absolute confidentiality. As I began to explain the situation, my voice was as steady as a surgeon's hand, a stark contrast to the portrait of the hysterical, pleading woman Ethan had painted in that conference room. That woman was gone. In her place was someone with a singular, clear objective and the resources to see it through. Someone who now understood that trust was a luxury she could no longer afford, and that the only blueprint worth following was the one she was about to draw for herself. I had 7 days until the Vanguard contract was scheduled to close. 7 days to completely rewrite the ending that Ethan was so certain he had already authored. Samuel Vance's office was a time capsule, unchanged in the 6 years since I'd last sat across his vast mahogany desk to discuss the details of my father's will. The same intimidating rows of leather-bound legal texts lined the shelves. The same tastefully muted oil paintings decorated the walls, and the same look of intense, measured concern settled on his face as I finished laying out everything I had discovered. I need to know precisely where I stand legally, I said, pushing the spiral notebook I'd started keeping across the polished wood. It was filled with meticulous notes, times, dates, and the verbatim quotes I'd overheard, and I need to know what options I have before he executes his plan. Samuel adjusted the reading glasses perched on the end of his nose and studied my notes. Your father would be immensely proud of your composure, Amelia. Not many people could maintain this level of clarity under these circumstances. I don't feel composed, Samuel, I confessed, the first tremor entering my voice since I'd walked through his door. I feel like I'm an actress who's just been handed the script to a tragedy. Then that is the role you must play, Samuel nodded, his hands already reaching for the thick binder containing our original incorporation documents for Apex. And it is absolutely critical that you do not break character until we have the full script in our hands. For the next 3 hours, we meticulously dissected every legal document tied to Apex Innovations. The initial seed funding agreement, which clearly stated my contribution of $1.45 million from my inheritance. The operating agreement, which showed Ethan holding a 60% ownership stake, despite my far larger capital investment, a concession I had made at the time because he had persuasively argued that his sweat equity and industry contacts justified a controlling interest. There's an anomaly here, Samuel said after a long silence, his finger tapping a paragraph in our most recent quarterly financial report. Look at these development costs allocated to the Vanguard project. They're nearly double what you've spent on any comparable project in your portfolio. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the rows of figures. Ethan told me the increased budget was for specialized third-party programming we had to outsource. To what firm? Samuel asked, his eyes sharp. A quick search of the vendor name, Nexus Dynamics Group, yielded almost nothing. The company was founded just 18 months prior, had no official website, no social media footprint, and a registered business address that traced back to a P.O. box in Delaware. I need to find out who is behind this company, I stated, the cold certainty returning. Samuel nodded grimly. My private investigator will be on it first thing in the morning. In the meantime, we need to get our hands on all banking records and tax filings for both Apex and this Nexus Dynamics. And Amelia, his expression turned grave. You must continue to act as if you know nothing. Business as usual. The following morning, I walked into the sun-drenched kitchen of our home to find Ethan at the espresso machine, his back to me. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to launch the ceramic mug in my hand at his head. Instead, I walked up behind him, pressed a kiss to his cheek, and asked him how his late night at the office went. "Productive," he mumbled, handing me a cup of coffee. "Very productive." "How are things looking for the final Vanguard presentation?" "Everything is perfectly on track," I replied, forcing my eyes to meet his in the reflection from the microwave door. "The final walkthrough is tomorrow, and we should have signatures by the end of the week." "That's my girl," he said, flashing a smile that used to make my heart flutter. Now, all I could see was the cold, predatory calculation behind it. At the office, I went through the motions of a normal day while secretly conducting my own deep dive investigation. During my lunch hour, I used my phone to photograph physical documents in the filing room that I couldn't access digitally. After everyone else had gone home, I sat in my locked office, poring over years of financial statements, searching for patterns and discrepancies I had missed while I was still blinded by trust. By Thursday afternoon, Samuel's investigator delivered the confirmation I was dreading but expecting. Nexus Dynamics Group was a shell corporation registered to Chloe's older brother, with Ethan listed as an undisclosed silent partner. Over the last 18 months, close to $350,000 of Apex funds had been systematically siphoned through this fake company for consulting services that were never rendered. "This is straight-up embezzlement," Samuel stated bluntly during our clandestine meeting at a quiet cafe 3 towns over, "and it provides us with significant leverage." "It's not enough," I said, my hand stirring a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking. "He'll just claim he was unaware of Chloe's brother's involvement. He'll play dumb. We need something undeniable, something that proves his intent beyond all doubt." That evening, my phone rang. It was Jessica, her voice sickeningly cheerful as she invited me out for a girls' lunch the next day. "Just us," she chirped. "You must be so stressed with this huge deal about to close." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, amazed at the steadiness of my own voice. I could really use a friend to talk to right now. The performance was becoming draining. Each morning felt like putting on armor disguised as a business suit. Each night I lay in bed next to the man who was actively plotting my complete financial and emotional ruin, my mind racing through strategies and contingencies while I listened to the sound of his steady breathing. On Friday morning, my opportunity came, disguised as a stack of last-minute revisions to the Vanguard contract. As CEO, Ethan needed to provide his signature to approve the minor changes before our final closing meeting. He was on a frantic call, pacing his office. I walked in, pointed to the highlighted sections that required his sign-off, and waited. What I didn't point out were the 3 additional pages I had discreetly inserted between the standard liability clauses. They were documents Samuel had drafted, authorizing the full and immediate transfer of all intellectual property rights for our core software architecture, the very heart of our company, from Apex Innovations to me personally. In his haste and utter distraction, Ethan scribbled his signature on every single page. "Thanks, honey," he said, already turning his back to me and resuming his phone call. I calmly gathered the papers, my heart hammering against my ribs, and walked them directly down to the notary public we kept on retainer 2 floors below. With every press of her official seal, my fortress grew stronger. Later that afternoon, Samuel confirmed the power of my move. Even if Ethan managed to maintain his controlling interest in Apex Innovations as a corporate entity, the core technology that made the company valuable now belonged exclusively to me. Any move to sever me from the company would leave him holding a virtually worthless shell, useless to Vanguard or any other investor. "This is your insurance policy, Amelia," Samuel explained, carefully placing the notarized documents into his briefcase. "But we are still missing the smoking gun, the piece of evidence that proves his malicious intent." As I drove home that evening, the sheer weight of it all threatened to crush me. Maintaining this elaborate charade while systematically dismantling Ethan's scheme from the inside out was taking a toll I hadn't anticipated. At a red light, I glanced at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. Her eyes were harder, her jaw set with a steely determination my father would have recognized in his own face. My phone pinged. A text from Ethan. Reservation for tomorrow night, the Sterling Grill, to celebrate our last dinner before we officially become millionaires. I knew exactly what he was planning. The restaurant was public enough to prevent a scene, but the table he'd booked would be private enough for his little speech. Chloe would be lurking nearby, phone in hand, the perfect celebratory ambush. Little did he know I had my own plans for that dinner, my own envelope to place on the table. I texted him back a single word: perfect. Then I made a call to Samuel with the final instructions for preparing the documents that would serve as my counterstrike. After almost 2 weeks of relentless investigation, of pretending, of planning, the end game was finally here. I was no longer the grieving daughter with a fat inheritance check ripe for exploitation. I was my father's daughter in every sense of the word, methodical, strategic, and utterly, absolutely unwilling to be underestimated. The morning sunlight streamed through our bedroom window, relentless and bright. Beside me, Ethan was already on his phone, a faint, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. Was he coordinating with Chloe? Finalizing some last cruel detail of my public humiliation? I realized with a strange sense of detachment that I no longer cared. The Vanguard team wants one last review meeting this morning before the official signing ceremony, I mentioned casually as I slid out of bed. I've scheduled it for 11. Ethan barely looked up from his screen. You've got it. I'm swamped with calls to potential new investors all morning. I paused, one foot inside our walk-in closet. New investors? We haven't talked about bringing on new investors. He finally glanced up, that charming, practiced smile appearing a fraction too quickly. Just some preliminary feelers, getting our ducks in a row for the big growth phase after the Vanguard money lands. Of course, I replied, selecting a sharp navy blue power suit that I knew made me look formidable. Smart. Two could play the game of secrets and lies. While he was having his preliminary feelers, I would be finalizing the transfer of our key client accounts to my direct oversight, a strategic move I had quietly initiated days earlier. The Vanguard review meeting was flawless. Their legal team was audibly impressed by the airtight nature of our documentation. Historically, Ethan had always been the charismatic frontman in these meetings. Today, however, I commanded the room, demonstrating an intimate, granular knowledge of every technical and financial detail. Our clients were visibly taken aback by my authority on subjects Ethan had always claimed were his domain. Your wife is a real force of nature, Vanguard's CEO remarked to Ethan during a short break. I watched my husband's face, catching the momentary tightening around his eyes before he recovered. She's full of surprises, he replied, placing his hand on the small of my back in a gesture that once felt like a loving anchor, but now felt like an assertion of ownership. After the meeting, I saw Jessica waiting in the building's main lobby, a designer handbag clutched in her perfectly manicured hands. It was time for our lunch, the one where she was tasked with gauging my emotional state before the evening's planned ambush. Ready for some girl time? She called out, her smile painfully bright. Absolutely, I replied, mirroring her false enthusiasm as we walked toward the trendy bistro just around the corner. We ordered expensive salads we had no intention of eating and exchanged meaningless pleasantries. All the while, I was studying my former friend, the woman who had sobbed on my shoulder at my father's funeral, who had helped me choose my wedding dress, and who now sat across from me, a co-conspirator in my life's demolition. So, how are things really with you and Ethan? She finally asked, her tone a masterclass in practiced concern. You two have seemed so distant lately. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, placed the glass down with a soft click, and met her gaze directly. It's funny you should bring up Ethan, I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I've been meaning to say thank you." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows lifted in confusion. Thank me? For what? For filming his rehearsal. The one for the breakup speech. It was incredibly enlightening. Every trace of color drained from Jessica's face. Her mouth opened and closed silently like a fish gasping for air. "Amelia, I can explain." "No need," I interrupted, my voice as cold and steady as a frozen lake. "You've made your allegiances perfectly clear. I just have one question for you." She stared at me, paralyzed. Was it worth it? Was whatever he promised you worth throwing away 15 years of friendship? Tears immediately welled in her eyes. Whether they were genuine or just another part of the performance, I couldn't tell, and I didn't care. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Chloe came to me. She said it was just for documentation, in case you tried to take him for everything in a divorce. I didn't know he was planning on cutting you out of the company." "But you knew he was planning to break my heart," I countered, "and you were going to film it for posterity." She visibly flinched when I used the correct word, the one she had so smugly used to correct Chloe during their little practice session. "I'm so sorry," she choked out, a single tear tracing a path through her foundation. I placed enough cash on the table to cover my untouched meal and stood up. "Your apology is noted." "And Jessica?" "I wouldn't recommend mentioning this conversation to Ethan or Chloe. It would be unfortunate for your career at Williams Marsh if your partners learned you were participating in corporate espionage." Her prestigious law firm had an ironclad ethics clause, a fact she had complained about to me over countless brunches. Just another piece of personal information, freely given in friendship, that I was now weaponizing against her. That afternoon, I requested a private meeting with our lead programmer, Ben. He'd been with us from the very beginning, a loyal employee who reported to me for operations but took his technical direction from Ethan. "Ben, I need your complete and total honesty," I said after closing my office door. "Has Ethan asked you to prepare any unusual file transfers recently? Client databases, our proprietary code, anything out of the ordinary?" The uncomfortable way he shifted in his chair told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. He asked me to create a full backup package of our core software architecture. He said it was a contingency for the Vanguard transfer. I nodded, careful to keep my expression neutral. "When was this request made?" "About 3 weeks ago. And he followed up yesterday, said he needed the final package by tomorrow afternoon. Perfect timing for his grand exit. I need you to prepare those backup packages exactly as he requested," I said calmly. "However, I also need you to place a verified, unaltered copy into our secure off-site repository first. Can you do that without him knowing?" Ben looked at me, confusion warring with his innate loyalty. "Is everything all right, Amelia?" "It will be," I assured him. "I'm simply making sure all of our company's intellectual property is properly secured during this transitional period." That evening, in our large, silent house, I gave myself exactly 30 minutes to grieve. I sat on the floor of our walk-in closet, surrounded by the physical evidence of the life we had built, and I sobbed. I sobbed until my throat was raw and my head ached. I mourned not just the man I thought I had married, but the entire future I had so naively believed in. The children we would never have, the partnership I thought was real. When the 30 minutes were up, I stood, washed my face, meticulously reapplied my makeup, and called the Sterling Grill to confirm our reservation. Then I made a second call. I requested their exclusive private dining room, the Bordeaux room instead of the corner table Ethan had booked. "And would it be possible to accommodate 4 additional guests?" I asked the hostess. "It's turned into a rather special business celebration." I invited Mr. Vanguard and his CFO, knowing Ethan wouldn't dare deviate from his plan with such crucial witnesses present. I also invited 2 of our most influential board members, people who had deeply respected my father and whose opinions carried immense weight in our industry. The The stage was now perfectly set. As I was getting ready for bed, Ethan came out of the master bathroom, a towel slung low on his hips. For a fleeting, treacherous moment, watching him move through the familiar space of our bedroom, a sliver of doubt crept in. Had I misunderstood everything? Was this all a massive, paranoid overreaction? Then his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He lunged for it with an uncharacteristic urgency, angling the screen so I couldn't see. "Everything okay?" I asked mildly. "Just Chloe," he replied far too quickly, finalizing some last-minute details for the Vanguard signing ceremony. "Ah," I nodded, turning away to conceal my expression. "Of course. Everything needs to be absolutely perfect for tomorrow." On that one point, at least, we were in complete agreement. The day that Ethan believed would be his crowning achievement dawned bright and crisp, a perfect autumn Saturday that held the scent of both endings and new beginnings. I watched him get dressed with meticulous care, choosing the same lucky navy suit he'd worn when we landed our very first major contract. "Big day," he commented, adjusting his tie in the mirror, his eyes deliberately avoiding mine in the reflection. "Life-changing," I agreed, the profound double meaning completely lost on him as he checked his phone for what must have been the 5th time in as many minutes. While he drove to the office for his so-called last-minute preparations, I drove to Samuel's home. There, we reviewed the contents of my envelope one final time. Each document was notarized, certified, and strategically ordered to deliver maximum devastating impact. "Remember, Amelia," Samuel advised as he slid the stack of papers into a heavy, cream-colored envelope bearing his firm's letterhead. "Timing is the key. Let him initiate his performance. Let him clearly state his intentions in front of those witnesses. Only then do you make your move." I nodded, my fingers tracing the sharp edge of the sealed envelope. "And the Vanguard team is prepped. They understand only that there is a potential internal management dispute that will not, under any circumstances, affect their acquisition of the technology rights, which," he added with a thin smile, "thanks to that document Ethan so carelessly signed, now belongs solely to you, irrespective of who controls the company." At 6:30 that evening, I arrived at the Sterling Grill, a full 15 minutes early. The maitre d' led me to the private Bordeaux room I had reserved. Its long mahogany table was impeccably set for 7, the empty chair next to mine serving as a silent testament to the confrontation that was about to unfold. Mr. Vanguard and his CFO arrived first, soon followed by the 2 board members. The air filled with the easy cadence of professional small talk as servers poured expensive wine and detailed the evening's specials. I maintained a flawless performance, discussing third-quarter earnings projections and market expansion strategies as if it were just another high-stakes business dinner. At precisely 7:02 p.m., Ethan walked in. He froze for a split second when he saw the assembled group. "Surprise," I said, rising to give him a light kiss on the cheek. "I thought we should celebrate this milestone properly, with the very people who helped make it a reality." His recovery was swift and impressive. The charming smile snapped into place as he moved around the table, shaking hands and graciously accepting congratulations. But I saw the flicker of sheer panic in his eyes and the subtle, almost imperceptible glance he cast toward the main dining room, where Chloe was undoubtedly waiting with her camera ready. "When did you arrange all this?" he asked through a clenched jaw as he took his seat beside me. "Yesterday," I replied evenly. "I know how much you value a dramatic setting." The dinner proceeded with an almost surreal normalcy. The steaks were cooked to perfection, the wine flowed, and the conversation remained firmly in the realm of business. Under the table, however, I could feel the frantic, nervous bouncing of Ethan's leg against mine. He checked his watch twice. Once he excused himself from the table, undoubtedly to send a frantic text to Chloe, updating her on the change of plans. Just as the dessert menus were being distributed, I caught a flicker of movement near the private room's partially open door. It was Jessica, standing in the hallway, feigning interest in a painting on the wall while her eyes were glued to our table. Behind her, partially obscured by a large potted palm, was Chloe, clutching her phone. They had adapted. The audience was different, but the show, it seemed, would go on. Ethan cleared his throat, setting his untouched menu aside. His entire posture shifted as he turned to face me, pointedly ignoring our guests. This was it. The moment he had rehearsed, the speech he had practiced. "Amelia," he began, his voice taking on that gentle, patronizing tone I now recognized as pure artifice. "There's something I need to talk to you about. Something important." Mr. Vanguard looked up from his menu, a hint of confusion on his face at the abrupt shift to a personal topic. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," Ethan continued, his gaze fixed on me. "About us. About our future." I saw his eyes dart for a split second toward the door, where Chloe had now repositioned herself, her phone held up, clearly recording. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the profound inappropriateness of what was unfolding. I think we both know that things haven't been right between us for some time," Ethan pressed on, fully committed to his script despite the unintended audience. "We've grown apart. We want different things." He paused, a perfectly timed, theatrical moment of reflection. "I think it would be for the best if we separated. If we ended our marriage now, before things get bitter." The table fell into a thick, uncomfortable silence. Vanguard's CFO suddenly became fascinated by his water glass. One of the board members started to push his chair back, but I gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture to stay seated. "I know this is hard to hear," Ethan continued, reaching for my hand across the table in a gesture that was meant to look compassionate, but felt as cold and clinical as a scalpel. "You probably feel like you can't live without me. You might even promise to change, to do anything, to do absolutely anything as long as I don't go." I finished for him, quoting his rehearsal back to him verbatim. His rhythm broke. His eyes widened almost comically for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. "Something like that, yes. But my mind is made up. It's better this way. Cleaner." I let 5 seconds of perfect crystalline silence hang in the air, feeling the weight of our guest's acute discomfort and Ethan's rising confidence that his plan, though modified, was succeeding. Then I reached into my purse and withdrew the heavy cream envelope. "I actually prepared something for this moment as well," I said, my voice cutting through the silence as I slid the envelope across the starched white linen toward him. "I think you should look at this before you say anything else." Confusion washed over his face. This was not in his script. His hand hesitated for a moment before he picked up the envelope. The thick paper made a soft tearing sound as he broke the seal and pulled out the contents. "What is this?" he mumbled, his eyes scanning the first page. "That," I replied, my voice clear and loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, "is a complete forensic accounting of all the funds you diverted, from Apex Innovations to Nexus Dynamics Group, the shell corporation you secretly established with Chloe's brother." His face went pale as he frantically flipped to the next document. "And that is the notarized intellectual property transfer you signed yesterday morning, granting me sole personal ownership of all our company's core technology and patents." His hands began to visibly tremble as he shuffled through the stack. "And that," I said as he reached the final pages, "is a transcript of the video recording where you practiced this exact speech, detailing how predictably I would cry and beg, while Chloe filmed and Jessica gave you notes on your performance." From the doorway, I heard a sharp, audible gasp. Chloe had lowered her phone, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. "You might want to invite your production crew to join us," I suggested to Ethan, whose face had gone from a healthy tan to the color of ash, since they went to all the trouble of documenting this occasion. For several long, excruciating seconds, The only sound in the room was the faint strain of a string quartet playing over the restaurant speakers. Ethan just stared at the papers, his fingers gripping them so tightly the edges began to crumple. When he finally looked up at me, the charming mask had not just fallen away, it had been shattered, revealing the ugly, cornered desperation beneath. "You had no right," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "I had every right," I countered evenly, "as your wife, your business partner, and as the person whose inheritance funded the very company you were just moments away from trying to steal from me." With a palpable reluctance, Chloe and a ghostly pale Jessica stepped into the room. Mr. Vanguard and our board members watched this corporate melodrama unfold with a mixture of horror and undisguised fascination. "Mr. Vanguard," I said, turning to our most important client with absolute composure, "I sincerely apologize for this unexpected turn of events during our celebratory dinner. However, I felt that complete transparency at this juncture was paramount." Vanguard, a seasoned executive who had seen his share of boardroom battles, simply gave a curt nod. "Please continue, Mrs. Thorne." 3 weeks ago, I overheard my husband rehearsing his plan to end our marriage immediately after your contract was signed, but before your capital was transferred. I gestured toward Chloe, with his girlfriend filming, and my now former friend here providing directorial feedback. Chloe flinched as if I'd slapped her, her eyes darting nervously toward the board members whose goodwill could make or break her career. "What she's not telling you," Ethan interjected, his voice rising with desperation, "is that she's the one who's been manipulating company documents. She's the one committing fraud." "Actually," I said calmly, sliding another, slimmer document out of my portfolio, "I have here a full forensic accounting report detailing precisely how $348,000 was embezzled from Apex's RD budget and funneled into Nexus Dynamics, a shell company, as I mentioned, registered to Miss Campbell's brother, with you as a silent partner." One of the board members, Eleanor Croft, a retired CFO with a legendary reputation for ethical rigor, reached for the report. She had been a friend and mentor to my father. Her expression hardened as she scanned the top page. "These illegal diversions began 18 months ago," she noted, her sharp eyes fixing on Ethan with undisguised contempt. "Right after the Series B funding round closed." Ethan's jaw worked silently. He looked from face to face, searching for an ally in a room that now held none. "This is a misunderstanding," he finally stammered. "Amelia is emotional about a personal matter, and she's conflating it with standard business operations." "Am I?" I asked, then turned to Vanguard's CFO. "Robert, would you consider funneling company funds to a shell corporation for services that were never rendered to be standard business operations?" Robert shook his head grimly. "No, we'd call that felony embezzlement." "This is insane," Chloe suddenly burst out, finding her voice. "You're all just taking her word for it? Ethan built this company. He's the visionary who used my father's life savings as his launch pad," I corrected her quietly. "And as for taking my word for it," I gestured to the phone still clutched in her hand, "why don't you play the recording you were just making? Or better yet, the one from the practice session, where Ethan so brilliantly predicted how I would beg and cry." Jessica, who had been standing by the door, silent and ashen, suddenly spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I have it. The original video. I kept a copy." All eyes swiveled to her as she pulled out her own phone with trembling hands. "I'm sorry, Amelia." This just went too far. Ethan lunged toward her, but Mr. Vanguard's personal security guard, who'd been standing discreetly outside the door, stepped between them with practiced ease. "That's enough," Vanguard said, his voice firm and final. He then turned to me. "Mrs. Thorne, while this has been illuminating, I must ask, how does this internal matter affect our contract?" "It doesn't," I assured him. The intellectual property rights you are acquiring were legally and irrevocably transferred to my personal ownership yesterday. Mr. Thorne signed the documents himself. I nodded toward the crumpled papers in Ethan's hand. The deal proceeds exactly as planned. The only change will be the payment destination, which will be the new holding company outlined in our revised agreement. Vanguard studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. We will proceed with the closing on Monday morning, as scheduled. You can't do this, Ethan said, his voice now dangerously quiet. All pretense gone. Everything we built, I corrected him. And I'm not taking it all. The corporate structure of Apex Innovations remains. You will retain your 40% share. As per our original agreement, I will retain my controlling 60%. Eleanor Croft's eyebrows shot up in approval. She understood my strategy perfectly. I was protecting the business entity, making it impossible for Ethan to claim in court that I had acted out of pure malice. The only significant difference, I continued, my eyes locked on his, is that effective immediately, I will be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer, and all financial oversight will be returned to proper, audited channels. For the first time all night, Ethan looked truly, utterly defeated. Not angry, not calculating, just hollowed out, as if he simply couldn't process the totality of his failure. You won't last 6 months running this company, he said flatly. You don't have what it takes. I smiled then, a real smile, not of malice, but of pure, unadulterated certainty. My father built a construction empire from bedrock and blueprints with nothing but his integrity and his determination. I inherited both. The dinner ended soon after. Our guests departed with firm handshakes for me and pointedly meaningful glances. Chloe had vanished during the commotion. Jessica was the last to leave, her tear-streaked face a mess of regret. For what it's worth, she said softly, I'm sending you that video file. Use it however you see fit. I simply nodded once, neither accepting nor rejecting her pathetic attempt at reconciliation. 3 months later, I sat in my father's old worn leather chair, which I had moved into the CEO's office at Apex Innovations. The Vanguard deal had closed without a hitch, infusing the company with the capital we needed to expand into 2 new international markets. Ethan had resigned from all operational duties and remained a completely silent shareholder. His lawyer had quickly communicated his agreement to an uncontested divorce in exchange for the very generous settlement I had offered. The wall behind my desk, once stark and white, now held a single-framed piece of art, my father's motto, beautifully calligraphed. Understand the full blueprint before you start building. A knock on my door, and Eleanor Croft walked in. After the dramatic dinner, she had agreed to serve as our interim CFO while we restructured the company's finances. Final quarterly report, she announced, placing a folder on my desk. We're up 17% from projections. I smiled, a genuine sense of peace settling over me. The sharp sting of betrayal hadn't vanished entirely, but it had morphed into something far more useful: wisdom, caution, and an unshakable sense of my own strength. Have you made a decision about the West Coast expansion? Eleanor asked, sinking into the chair opposite my desk. I reached for my father's old blueprint tube, which now sat in the corner of my office, and extracted the architectural plans I had been reviewing all morning. I have, I said, unrolling them across my desk. We're breaking ground next month. Not just on a new office building, but on a new future, one I was designing myself, with clear eyes, a steady hand, and the hard-won knowledge of exactly what I was capable of surviving, and more importantly, what I was capable of building from the ashes. If this story of reclaiming one's power resonated with you, I hope you'll hit the subscribe button. It's completely free and helps support the creation of more stories like this one. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered your own strength only when someone else severely underestimated you? Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next story. End of story.